there and side by side. I cannot see myself, but I guess that's okay. All right, so can you guys see the PowerPoint and me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, great.
Yes.
Cool, cool, cool. All right, so thank you so much, guys, for coming today. We're going to be talking about ethics and professional conduct, and specifically about multiple relationships. So this is part of the 40-hour required RBT trainings, but also feeds into our requirements for our IBHS program. And it's kind of a fun one to talk about because, you know, there are so many ethical decisions that go into everything we do. So we'll start with housekeeping. So this is being recorded. And, you know, with that in mind, in particular, because we do share this out, please do not use any client information. If you do at some point, you know, open up your mic and talk. So no initials, no names, no locations, no specifying information. So be very careful with that. Please keep your microphone muted unless you're asking a question, and try to keep your questions fairly general. Like I said before, you must complete the post test. And for those of you taking this live in particular or close to Thanksgiving, it's going to be a little while because Ashley is in charge of that and she is not back yet. So please be patient with that and keep the code words written somewhere. There will be 3 code words today. So make sure you write those down. And then just that, you know, general training reminder that the information is only as good as what you use it for. So if you just listen to the training and, you know, then go on and live your life the way that you always did, then the training didn't do any of us any good other than checking off a box, which is not why we do trainings, or at least not why we should be doing trainings. All right, so our objectives for this training. Okay, so by the end, we want to know what a multiple relationship is and why they can be problematic. Right, so that's the, you know, kind of crux of what we're talking about. To be able to identify when, you know, when our spidey senses are kind of going off, so that we know when, you know, we're in danger of a problematic multiple relationship. To understand the expectations. And as we kind of go through this, you're going to hear me talk about the BCBA ethics codes, and in particular, the ones related to being an RBT. All right. So if you're saying, well, but Rob, I'm not an RBT, that for purposes of this training don't matter too much. At some points, I might point out the BCBA equivalent, but because this does fulfill that 40-hour requirement for the RBT training, that is the specific code we're going to reference. But in 99 out of 100 cases, the expectations are the same. So please strike from your mind the, oh, I'm not an RBT, so this doesn't apply to me. It does, and it will. So yeah, so we're going to talk a lot about specific codes. We're also going to talk about our company policies as KidsPeace. But if you're attending from a different agency, you will have an equivalent set of standard operating procedures or policies that are probably very similar, if not the same, as the ones that belong to KidsPeace. And then, of course, we need to be able to describe the correct procedure of what we should do when we suspect that something has occurred that is a, you know, potential ethical problem. So before we kind of get into the specifics of multiple relationships, I just kind of wanted to point out the nature of ethical decision making and of ethics in general, and, you know, just to kind of, you know, remind everyone or you know, point out that ethics are rarely black and white. It's rarely a, oh yeah, well, do this. It's a decision-making process. And so trainings like this really are meant to hone your ability to make those decisions in a decisive and effective and really objective manner. All right, so there's 3 main areas that I want you to consider all throughout this training and then going forward when you're making decisions. So the first is the context, right? So as behaviorists, we're big into, you know, contextual analysis and the context of things. So in what in what environment is this decision being made? I'll give you the example in a second. So you're thinking about context. So what's going on around it, okay, that might make it more or less important? What is the impact? Okay, so one way or another. So how much does it help others? How much does it, how much does it even matter? So sometimes something might cause it might make a lot of impact, whereas in other situations, in a different context, it might have no impact at all. And then does it have the potential to cause harm to particularly our client? Those are always the people that we are thinking of first, but also ourselves and our company, our coworkers, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so these things are hand in hand. So if you think about, you're driving down the road and you're deciding how fast you're going to go. It's the law is very black and white, right? So the speed limit is 45 miles an hour, okay? But what is the context? It's lightly raining, but you are late for a doctor's appointment. And if you miss this doctor's appointment, if you show up more than 5 minutes late, they will no longer serve you. And this is, potentially life-threatening for you, right? So the impact of that is pretty great, but it's lightly raining, so there's some harm there. If you get in a car accident and you die, well, then that doesn't matter that you got to that, or that you were running late for that appointment. So these are the things. That's a very kind of silly non related to what we do exactly decision. But just these are the things that I want you to consider. So what is the context? What's surrounding it? How much impact does it have? And what potential does it have to do harm? All right, so let's start with some foundational kind of ideas and some definitions. So we have to start by defining what a multiple relationship is. So this is what this training is all about. All right, so and these definitions come directly from the BACB ethics codes for RBTs. So a multiple relationship is a mixing of two or more of an RBT's roles, such as professional and personal. That's really the big one, although it could be professional and professional, with a client, stakeholder, supervisor, coworker, or someone closely associated with or related to the client, right? So back on the first slide, I had the picture of the lady with lots of hats on. So, I like to think of it as the different hats that we wear. Okay, so in your life, I'm sure you have a lot of people that you have multiple hats with. They are your friend, but they're also your coworker. They're your supervisor, but they're also your coworker. So they might supervise you directly, but you might also work with them in a classroom or in the field. You might hang out with people that you work with. You might, occasionally have a friendly conversation with someone, with a client's parent. So maybe more than occasionally. Hopefully you are having lots of friendly conversations, but again, the context of that could very quickly become risky, which is what we're talking about today. So a therapist and a friend, cutting your client's hair, babysitting for your client. So these are all examples of multiple relationships. And what I really need to point out again, and will continue to point out, is that these things aren't necessarily black and white, like you cannot do this. Most of the examples we talk about will be kind of clear that way, but a lot of them are not that easy. So again, I don't want, as we go through these examples, for you to just say, oh, that's something exactly that I cannot do. There will be some instances of that. But many of them, it really comes down to looking at that in decision-making kind of graphic that I showed you, and making an educated decision, usually with input from other people as well. All right, so our other key definition is conflict of interest. Okay, so this is really when you've got your decision making process is altered by the fact that you have two different relationships or two different approaches about the same person. So it creates a risk to services provided to the professional relationship with a client or coworker. So the conflicts may result in a situation in which personal, financial, or professional considerations might influence professional judgment. So because you have multiple relationships with a person, because there's multiple kind of directions from which you're making this decision, your decision isn't really pure. So if you were coming at it from one role, so if you're, say, as a therapist, well, obviously I should not, give this child, the money they need to, get on the bus, to take a trip wherever. But you're like, oh, but they really need it, and I really care about them, and they're important to me, and the parents and I have become close, so I think it's okay, right? So that's where that's where a conflict of interest arises, where you would in your professional role, you would make the decision one way, but because of that conflict of interest, your judgment is now being impacted. So that's really, when we need to be super self-aware so that we know when that judgment shift is occurring. That's kind of the tricky part, is that usually when you're making a poor ethical decision, oftentimes you've already made the poor decision before you realize that you had a really important decision to make. So then it's kind of dealing with the fallout. But you want to train yourself to be ready to know when these ethical questions are coming up, so that you don't have to clean up the mess that you've created, and rather you can address it head on. All right, so we're going to go through the code now, kind of piece by piece. Not every single piece of the code, thank goodness, because we'd be here for quite some time. But we're going to pull out the pieces that I think are specifically related to multiple relationships. So 1.01 talks about being honest and working to support an environment that promotes truthful behavior in others. And we do not lead others to engage in fraudulent, illegal, or unethical behavior. Okay. So why did I pull this one out? Because the result of having multiple relationships with people leads to the potential. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but it leads to the potential for us to lead others to engage in fraudulent, illegal, or unethical behavior. And we're going to kind of talk about that as we go through, but it's just more likely. So if you feel friendly with the parent of a child that you work with, you consider them a friend. You consider yourself to be close to them. You consider a person that you work with. As a therapist who works with a lot of fantastic autistic adults, it is hard to not sometimes see them as friends. But it's very important to not to do so, because that that confuses my therapeutic relationship with them. But you get these moments where if you feel friendly with a client's parent, there becomes this relationship where you get these thoughts, or if maybe you don't have these thoughts, oftentimes the other person does. Oh, well, you wouldn't tell, would you? Right? Like you wouldn't. That I'd get in trouble for this, so you wouldn't report me, right? I know that I'm not supposed to do it, but you wouldn't report me because we're friends, right? Hey, me, I wouldn't do anything wrong. So you get like this attitude of not like inability to be in trouble. And we really have to be really hyper vigilant of this, so that we're not putting the people that we work with at risk, our company at risk, and ourselves at risk. Because as soon as you fall into these traps of, oh, this is no big deal, they won't tell on me, you're now creating a situation where you're implicating, someone potentially in fraud, in a reportable, ethical violation, et cetera, et cetera. And, as much as we might feel like, it will never be found, it oftentimes is. So that's the first piece of the code that I wanted to point out. The second one here is just that RBTs only provide services under their RBT certification within a clearly defined role under close ongoing supervision. So, the bottom line of that is just that, the BACB expects RBTs to act as an RBT, not as other things. And in your position as a BHT or a behavior consultant or whatever position it is that you are in, you are hired to be in that role. So, we want to make sure that we're staying within the boundaries of what we do, oftentimes regardless of other skills that you might have or, feelings that you have towards the people that you work with. All right, so this one's pretty easy. It's a little, it's confusing, but also easy once you kind of understand it. But I wanted to put it in here. So RBTs are never employers of their supervisor. Okay, so you cannot be the boss of the person who is providing your RBT supervision. But there is this caveat for those who are RBTs who are getting their BCBA supervision hours done. They can contract with the person who is supervising them, but that's not necessarily being their supervisor. So it creates a weird two-way kind of relationship where if you are employing the person who is supervising you, that pretty clearly makes it difficult for the supervisor then to give you clear and unbiased feedback. All right, so here's the big one. Why didn't you start with this one, Rob? I thought the other ones were better places to start, and this one comes later in the code, so that's why, I guess. All right, so 1.1, 1.10. So RBTs avoid multiple relationships with clients, coworkers, and supervisors. Okay, so mixing of two or more relationships, friend, family member, employee, employer, may result in a conflict of interest and risk harm to the client. Right, so this is the crux of what we're talking about, really, is being aware of and avoiding these multiple relationships. And then it goes on to say, if we find that a multiple relationship is developed, we immediately inform the supervisor, work to resolve it, and document it. Okay, so and as we talk about this, I want to reiterate. Some multiple relationships are not, immediately grounds for, oh, this cannot exist. There are going to be multiple relationships. There are going to be times where, people that you work with in other contexts. There's going to be times where you see your clients in other contexts. And there are times where it is acceptable. So again, but that would be something that you're divulging. If you have an inclination to not tell anybody, like, oh, this is actually my cousin's son, I'm not going to tell anybody, right? That right there is a red flag, right? So if it truly is going to be an ethically okay multiple relationship, then that's something you should be willing to divulge kind of immediately. So the bottom line is, again, we're thinking about that triangle. Okay, what is the context in which this multiple relationship is existing? What is the impact of it, and how much harm does it risk to the client, to yourself, to your company, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, your first code word. So the code words this time, I realized that making it multiple choice was a little bit too easy. So you're going to have to choose the 3 correct out of a list of potential code words. Your 3 code words today are going to be the three things from Thanksgiving that I'm looking forward to the most this year. So this is not necessarily my favorite 3 Thanksgiving meal pieces, but these are the three that I'm looking forward to the most this year. So your first one is, of course, cranberry sauce, right? And yes, I like all cranberry sauce, but my favorite is the cranberry sauce shaped like a can, um, which you can judge me all you'd like, but it is delicious, right? So your first code word is cranberry sauce. And if you're watching this at a later date and wondering why tomorrow is Thanksgiving, so that's why we've got a slightly Thanksgiving themed set of code words. All right, so next code 1.11. This one talks about gift giving. And if you've known the previous BACB codes on gift giving, this loosened. So it previously was that gifts were not given or taken, and that has changed. But it's still pretty strict. So RBTs do not give or accept gifts from client stakeholders or supervisors with a monetary value of more than 10 US dollars or the equivalent. Okay. Um, there are plenty of instances where gift giving seems to be the right thing to do. And this is to me, this is funnily enough, it's not really a saying, but I think that this thing comes up constantly. There are a lot of times where our families really want to give us gifts, where the kids want to give us something, where we want to give them something. So it's a big kind of point of decision. And then down here at the bottom, the BACB recognizes if the employer has a stricter policy regarding gift exchange, such as prohibiting gift exchange, RBTs follow that policy. This is very tricky. Okay, so I think on the surface, gift giving and gift accepting feels, fairly harmless. And, all of us at some point have been in this situation. And it's, you might say like, Rob, I don't understand why this is a problem. Well, because gifts have a monetary value, and the nature of them paying you is complicated. So if they're giving you something that has a monetary value, that could be construed as paying them. There could be a sense of owing. So they might feel like, oh, I gave you a gift. Did you get anything for the kid? Once something is given, there might be an expectation that it happens frequently. Like, oh, you got me something last year. Oh, I wonder what they're going to get me this year. And it just creates a dangerous situation potentially. I would say in most situations, it is harmless. But the problem is those times when it's not, and you didn't realize until it was. So it is of utmost importance to be careful with this. And we'll talk about the KidsPeace expectation on this later, which is that we do not accept or give gifts. But with that said, I know that there are times where it does happen. But that is one of those cases where we do have a stricter policy on it. All right, 1.12. Okay, RBTs do not engage in romantic or sexual relationships with current client stakeholders or supervisors. Okay, so then it gives some more specifications that's when it comes to current client stakeholders or supervisors. Okay, so for former clients or stakeholders, 2 years from the date that the professional relationship ended. Okay. And then former supervisors cannot have a romantic or sexual relationship until the professional relationship has been documented as having ended. And then it talks about having a supervisory relationship with individuals that you had a past romantic or sexual relationship with until at least 6 months after the relationship has ended. So they give really clear guidelines for this, and these were actually loosened. The timelines used to be quite a bit longer, but I guess it comes up enough and enough people pushed back that they they kind of loosen that up. And in our program, if you're thinking like, oh my goodness, Rob, we work with children, that is true, right? So, obviously, rules of consent and legality, they take precedence to anything. But remember that this is a more general training for anyone who's providing ABA services, and those could be consenting adults. But anyway, we know that sex and romance really complicate things, even though, we have these guidances on or guidelines on how long you should wait. It really must be taken into, deep consideration whether you can have an objective role when this other thing is in existence. It's very hard to imagine a situation where you were someone's therapist in any way, and then later you went on to have a romantic or sexual relationship with them, and there isn't some sort of, coercion's not the right word, but kind of change of judgment. So it's just something really to bear some consideration about, but a little bit easier usually for us, at least because we do work with children. So that kind of at least means we don't have to think about that much. But there have been cases where we have had staff in the past who have ended up in romantic relationships with caregivers at some point. And that's always a can of worms that we have to, kind of be aware of. This might be the last one, 2.08. Okay, so RBTs protect the confidentiality and privacy of their clients, stakeholders, and others in the workplace. Right. So why does this come into multiple relationships? Well, because having multiple relationships makes it confusing. Okay, so what if one of the hats you're wearing is HIPAA protected and one is not? Okay, so you always have to default to the stricter guidelines, right? So if you are their therapist, but then they go to your church, okay, that's really difficult, right? Can you have that relationship? Potentially yes, potentially no, right? It seems like it would be, an overreaction to have to find a new church if it's a church that you both have been going to for a while. Seems like it might be an overreaction to have to end your professional relationship with them. But potentially, depending on what that church looks like and what the interactions look like, etc., it's very possible that might not be a multiple relationship you could maintain. And certainly, your therapeutic relationship is HIPAA, kind of governed, but your church relationship is not. So what kind of conversation, can occur between the two of you when, you're passing each other at the church? So just having those multiple relationships leads to the potentiality for you to be talking about things you should not be with people you should not be. When someone says like, oh, I noticed you talking to little Johnny over there, like, how do you know them? Oh boy, right? Like that's really the more I think about this church example, I'm thinking I don't know that you could pull it off. Because churches are usually pretty close-knit communities. So that's probably not a multiple relationship you could maintain. All right, so let's talk about KidsPeace policy. And again, if you're attending or you're watching this and you're not a KidsPeace employee, I urge you to look at your own policies. The first one is personal contact and relationships with clients outside of the context of the approved treatment plan are prohibited. Okay, so that's pretty clear that they're saying that multiple relationships should not exist. No associate shall visit a client's home except as part of their assigned professional responsibilities. So you're not going to their house for their birthday party to stop by and say hello, to drop off a gift. So you should only be going to a client's home as part of your scheduled sessions. Clients are never to visit a associate's home under any circumstances. And this one, I can't really think of a context under which it would be acceptable. Um, they should not know where we live, let alone, go to the place that we live. And we should refrain from connecting with them on any types of social media. Right now, maybe you've got some sort of professional Instagram account where, you show off homes that you're selling, or, art that you've done, or things like that. And anyone can follow you. Well, that, we're not going to tell you can't have an account like that, but you must be aware of the context and impact and harm of anyone being able to follow you on an account like that. Right. Next, so KidsPeace policy is that no associate shall give gifts to clients. And as a general principle, gifts from clients are to be declined, particularly gifts of any value. They recognize that a token gift, they made you something that has very, small or no value. We recognize that the harm or impact of telling a kid that you can't take the picture that they made for you is probably more damaging than the potential harm of you accepting that gift. So, and I'll also remind you, the context of KidsPeace policy is really rooted in the work that we do with, really severely impacted youth who are at our residential and psychiatric, programming, our, hospital programming. So, boundaries are often have to be really strict because of those. So in the community setting, our policies, our policies are still our policies, but there are times where it might be acceptable to give a gift to a client. But it should be, you should be making your team aware of that and disclosing it to your supervisor to make sure that they agree with your decision. Aside from work that's defined as part of your established therapeutic role, your associates shall not pay or employ clients to perform work. Okay, so you're not, paying them in any way to do work for you. And no financial transactions or, giving of property, right? So that seems, a little bit, it seems pretty clear, like, oh yeah, we can't give them money. We do sometimes set up fundraisers, but that has to be approved like through KidsPeace. But it seems like, oh, they're in need of extra clothing, and I have extra clothing. I was going to donate it anyway. But that is the transfer of personal property, one way or the other. They shouldn't be, giving you things. You shouldn't be giving them things. In our policy, we have kind of this guideline of appropriate versus inappropriate physical interaction. And I'm not going to go through every one of these. Some of them seem really obvious. Some of them seem a little bit less so. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a child cling to my leg, and that is under inappropriate physical interactions. I'm not really letting them do that. I suppose I'm not, like yanking them off of me or running from them when they try to do it. But this kind of happens pretty often. So again, I would strongly recommend that, you are considering, what Greg Hanley calls televisability. So would you be okay with someone else seeing the physical interaction that you're having with the client? Would you be able to explain it and tell us why, it does not present, a risk of harm to the client? So, this is just another example of where, the context of our policies sometimes does not match the context of the work that we actually do. So yeah, have the conversation with your treatment team and or your supervisor. So those are potentially appropriate physical interactions. Nothing is okay all of the time, right? All right. So why are multiple relationships harmful? And, hopefully this is kind of been coming through as we've been talking. So they can impair your objectivity, right? So it makes it hard to make, objective decisions. When you feel friendly towards someone, it's going to be hard for you to make a professional decision in a lot of cases. They create a coercive or unequal power dynamic, right? So, um, you know, the client might feel pressured to do something they normally wouldn't. The family might feel pressured. You might feel pressured, right? So when these multiple relationships happen, it's like, come on, like, me, it's all right, it's just this time, just for me, like, you wouldn't tell on me. That whole like flood of nightmare scenarios, you want to keep in mind. Increased risk of exploitation. Okay, so them taking advantage of us taking advantage of them, right? So dual relationships really make the lines blurry, and so it becomes unclear as to what you can or can't do, which then could potentially lead to problems in decision making and doing things we should not. It creates it creates harm to the therapeutic relationship. So if you're friends with them, during session, are you spending time hanging out instead of actually following through with the treatment goals? Are you following through the treatment plan with integrity? Probably not, if you have that secondary relationship. And it creates a huge amount of agency liability, right? So you're not only jeopardizing yourself, but you're jeopardizing our licensure. You could be putting us at risk for huge, fines or other violations that we cannot afford. So you could potentially, close the whole program because of a multiple relationship, as well as, find yourself, out of a job, fined, in jail, etc. And that's extreme examples, but again, it's better to kind of think of these things with severity so that we have our guard up to prevent danger from happening. So some examples: client wants to attend your birthday party. That's, of course, they want to attend your birthday party, but they can't, right? Caregiver offered me homemade food, right? So yeah, like some of these seem like, well, what's the big deal about that? Depending on the context, it might be okay. We don't have time to go through all the examples, Rob Harvey. So some high risk behaviors. So social media connections can be really iffy, right? So our policy is that they should not happen. But they're seeing pictures of you and your family. You're seeing pictures of them outside of session. They're hearing, political statements that you make online. They're seeing, TikTok videos of you doing silly or, just non-professional kind of things. All that stuff will impact your therapeutic relationship. So it's very important that you are aware of that. Gift giving and receiving. We talked about transporting clients. Unless your role specifically states that you can, we never do this. Okay, outside the context of dire emergencies, in which case you should usually be calling an ambulance anyway. Babysitting or respite care, right? Really, really, blurs boundaries. Sharing personal life details can be dangerous. Sometimes it can be valuable. So that's a big one to consider carefully. And being alone with the client outside of session scope, that really is hard to imagine a time when that would be acceptable. But again, you think back to that church, example, and after church, you both happen to be standing outside the church waiting for your families to come out, and you're both there, right? So can happen. So keep your conversations professional, redirect personal questions politely, and follow your company boundary policies. So you can say really politely, okay, like, thanks so much for offering, but I'm not allowed to. My job says I can't do that, but I do really appreciate it. Oftentimes that's all you need to do, and just kind of making sure that you stick with that, because they will often accept that in the moment, and then the next day offer the same thing. So So with caregivers, some of the risks are becoming their emotional support person. So being the person that they talk to. How is that damaging? Well, because we've all had that time where they want to spend half a session kind of unloading on you. And while they're unloading on you, are you fulfilling their treatment objectives? Almost certainly not, because you're supposed to be working with the child. Uh, they see you as a friend instead of their child's therapist. They're inviting you to do things. They're asking you for favors. They're pulling you into their family drama. And before you know it, you are seeing them as a friend as well. So your professional decision making really get called into question. um, and I bring this up later, but really the big thing with caregivers is, well, one, are you still fulfilling with fidelity the client's, treatment plan? But then also, is your judgment when it comes to play, is it going to be cloudy, right? So are you going to hesitate if you have to call Childline? If you hesitate before calling Childline because you don't want to get them in trouble, that to me is a clear indicator that you now have a problematic dual relationship, and you most likely have to stop working with this family. And you don't want that to happen. Okay, so you need to maintain your professional tone. Um, you want to redirect conversations, redirect them. Hey, that's something you should talk to the office about. That's something you should talk to the BCBA about. That's something you should talk to the behavior consultant about. And always just roll things back to the treatment, so like, oh yeah, really cool. That sounds awesome that you're doing that this weekend. What I'm thinking is today we should really start working on those man sessions that we want to get in play, right? So always just that kind of like polite redirection. You don't have to blow them off entirely, like, hey, you can't talk about that. That's kind of rude, and that's not going to work out terribly well. But you can, kind of like shut them down a little bit and move it along. So yeah, and one of the examples I'll point out from here on the other side is no venting about coworkers or your personal life. That really becomes an easy trap for us. Like they come in and they say like, oh, Lindsay was late to session yesterday, and then you're like, oh yeah, man, Lindsay's always late to all of her sessions. I don't even know how she still works here. That's the last thing on earth you want to do, even if that is the way that you feel, or even if that is a fact. That is not the way that you deal with that, and that is only going to make us look bad. All right, so we also have to consider our multiple relationships with other staff. Okay, so having a romantic relationship with another staff member. Very funny because my wife works at KidsPeace, so we're all aware that I'm an example of this, and hopefully an example of how it can work. But we do not directly share clients. She's not in the field anymore, etc. But and she's not my direct supervisor, and I'm not hers. But if you do have a romantic relationship with someone you share a case with, that they're not even your supervisor, that can create a really difficult situation where you are going to want to talk about the client outside of a professional kind of situation. But certainly if you're in a romantic relationship with someone to whom you report, they're doing your supervision for you, that becomes problematic because you're not getting that full therapeutic kind of interaction. You can have gossip going on, even just that friendship, like you're after session, you're hanging out, and there can become a lot of kind of messy areas where you're talking about things, you're doing things, you're sharing information that should not be shared, and it's only happening because of that dual relationship. Okay, keep going, Rob, keep going. Excuse me. So with external providers, this one's really difficult. So we work with teachers, we work with daycare staff, we work with camp staff, we work with physical therapists and OTs and all these sorts of things. So it's important to be very wary of multiple relationships with these people as well. It's really easy to get friendly with classroom staff. to, to find, to know what they're doing on the weekend, even to, they might invite you to hang out with them. You might want to invite them to hang out with you. Like it's, it can be hard to make friends as an adult. And this seems like a really good way to do it. In fact, I have a really good friend of mine who I met through a camp where I worked. So, shame on me. But at that time, I really do hope that I was, maintaining my professional role within that classroom. Or within that camp setting. But it is a really potentially dangerous thing, because before you know it, are you hanging out with the staff instead of working with your child and providing the required interventions? Are you acting as a para instead of as a BHT or a BC? Are you doing someone else's role instead of yours? Are you working with all the kids instead of the kid that you're there to work with? Are you being pressured into revealing information that's not theirs to know? Are you being pressured to do stuff that's not really ABA approved? So these are all really, hard-hitting examples of why we have to be really careful about this, really measured, and make sure that we're making good decisions about, the relationships that we create with these people that we work with. Because again, usually you realize after the fact that you've put yourself in a potentially problematic situation. All right, so steps to take when we suspect that an ethics violation has occurred. Okay, so the first thing is we have to make sure that everything is documented. Okay, so whether that be in the client paperwork or more often through your supervisor or through your HR department. Because unless something did directly occur with the client, which hopefully you're catching this before something happens directly with the client, it wouldn't go in the client documentation. So notifying your supervising BCBA or BC or supervisor immediately is really important, because they're going to be the one that's going to guide you through the process, right? So once you're in it, it's going to be hard for you to make an objective decision about what to do and what not to do. And do not confront the person directly, right? So do not, call. So this is if you suspect that someone else has had an ethical violation. Don't go up to them and say like, hey, I know you're friends with so and so's mother. Now I feel like this one, this one's very clearly says do not, but I think I'm going to disagree with my own PowerPoint. Say it sometimes it might be in your best interest to have that conversation in addition to making the supervisor aware. Do not gossip or vent about it 100%, right? So, don't walk around telling, oh my God, can you believe that Gina is friends with that daycare staff? Yeah, she went out for drinks with them again. So ridiculous. That is not valuable in any way. And of course, when you're reporting anything, just make sure that you're protecting their confidentiality. If you do have that dual relationship, you work with them in two different contexts, that gets really tricky as to how you're going to report it. All right, so we're going to practice. After this turkey very slowly emerges from the bottom, and that is your second code word. And you're like, Rob, we only have 9 minutes left, and this is only the second of 3 code words. I know, it's okay, we're good. So my second thing I'm very much looking forward to is the turkey. Oh, Rob, you're so predictable. I know. I'm jonesing for turkey. So code word number 2 is turkey. Make sure you write that down. So remember, as we practice, you're thinking about context, and what context is this occurring? How much impact does it potentially have, and how much harm does it present? All right. Your client has an older sibling that you get along with really well during sessions. They're helpful, engaged in sessions, and always kind. At the end of session one day, they ask if you would like to meet for coffee sometime. You sure would like to. What's the best way to handle this situation? If someone throws it in the chat, someone's going to have to read it for me. If not, someone can unmute. But everybody take a a second to think about it, and then throw out an idea. What do we think about this one? Not necessarily dating, but it kind of feels like potentially dating the older sibling of a client.
That's really nice of you to ask, but unfortunately I can't.
Yeah.
Short and simple.
Yep. Yeah. Can't. Fortunately, I can't. Yeah, you got to shut them down, I think. I mean, if it, if it really gets to the point where you're like, I really want to hang out with this person, you would have to stop being, you'd have to stop working with their
On the
sibling.
case.
Yeah. And potentially wait, quite a while before you actually start, so is it really worth it? But yeah, good. Thank you, Lindsay. All right, you've been working with a child for a while and the parents really trust you. They ask if you would be willing to babysit your client on weekends. They offer to pay you in cash for this and say that they don't trust anyone else to watch their child. They really need a break. What's the best way to handle this situation? Someone other than Lindsay.
Okay, so I would just say I really appreciate the thought, but it's not something that I'm capable of doing.
Perfect. Well done, Barb. Yeah, I mean, this one is one where you're thinking like, oh, but the the impact of this is pretty high. Like they don't trust anybody else. They're not going to get the break from somebody else. So, I guess they're just never going to get a break. Well, that's, unfortunately, this is really, it sounds heartless, but that is their problem to figure out, not yours. And it does create a really risky situation that you do not want to get involved in. So good job. You're talking to your coworker and they let it slip that they often show up 15 or 20 minutes late for session, but the parents just say, don't worry about it and sign for the whole time. You consider the coworker to be a friend. You often meet for lunch and text quite a bit. You know that reporting is this could end their employment and jeopardize their whole career, and they're truly fantastic with kids. What's the best way to handle the situation?
I think technically first you have to talk to them about it first before you report them to their supervisor or to the code or to the board.
That is true, according to the RBT.
So I guess I would just
go ahead.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah,
go.
I guess I would just have a conversation with them and say like, hey, like I admire you as a coworker and as a professional, and I think that you're like very effective when you're working with clients, but I don't think it's appropriate like this timeliness issue, and that needs to be something that is addressed. And like maybe we could talk to a supervisor about that, or maybe you should talk to a supervisor about that if you need support in figuring that out. Yeah.
Well done, Sky.
Something like that. Obviously with more tact, but something like that.
Yeah, no, you'd take some time to think about it. But yeah, that's this is like a really difficult one because you know that this person, like, there's no good ending to this story. Because if you don't report this, ultimately, you know, you're now potentially implicated in the fraud that has occurred. So yes, according to the BACB, you are supposed to directly address it with the person, but we do have to make sure that it's ultimately reported. So either, they confirm that they've reported it, or you report it together, or you both report it. But yes, giving them that opportunity to, to kind of explain what they did. But as a KidsPeace employee, you're not required to do that. That is part of your, if you are an RBT or a BCBA. All right, most days when you arrive at session, your client's mom has your favorite drink from Starbucks waiting for you on the table. She explains that it's part of her family's upbringing to have something for a guest when they arrive. What's the best way to handle the situation?
I'd have a similar response to Lindsay's, just letting them know that I'd be unable to accept.
Yep, that's right. As much as you want it, Sierra, it's your favorite Starbucks drink. It's saving you a lot of money. But think about the tab you're ringing up there over time. That's like if it happened once, I might say, like, if they're like, oh, like you're in the car, you're driving, you're with them during a session and they're picking something up and they're like, hey, do you want something? maybe, but it happening every time really, kind of puts it in a different light. While you're holding session one night, the parents order a couple of pizzas and offer you a piece. This is not a regular occurrence and you are pretty hungry. What's the best way to handle this situation? Feels like a trick. It's not a trick question, guys.
I've had this happen a lot. So I just generally say I really appreciate it, but it's not at this time.
Wow. Okay. Good job, Barb. Anybody disagree?
I've actually had this happen too, with but more like a home cooked meal being offered, and I still just say, oh, no, thank you. I can't right now.
All right, you guys are all more ethical than me. I'd eat a piece of pizza. I don't, if you think of it in terms of the context and the impact and the, like a piece of pizza, they already have the pizza. They didn't order it for you. They didn't order extra for you. It's not a regular occurrence. The problem is when you sit down for pizza every week at the same time. But I think that as a supervisor, I'd probably be okay with you doing this on occasion. But if you wanna go the stricter route, I would always lean in that direction. All right, Rob. Hyperspeed here. Your coworker's child was just diagnosed with autism. They know how amazing you are with kids you work with, so naturally they ask if you can come over a few times a week to work with their child. Best way to handle the situation. That's really difficult, guys. You would have to really disclose this to your supervisor to make sure that you guys weren't on cases together. You might have to consider whether you can continue being an employee, but at the same time, like what is the impact of not doing this? Well, they might end up with a junky BHT, and that you could have done a really good job for them. So, but then you're providing services for your friend's child, which is a terrible dual relationship too. So I think the right answer to this is probably to tell your coworker that you will help them find a good staff, but that you just can't be the therapist for their child. But boy, would that really wrench at my heart. So a couple red flags. Can you imagine working with a caregiver and feeling like you should give them another chance before making a warranted child line report? Big red flag, right? Have you ever had a caregiver encourage you to change the time on a document or sign a blank form? Have you considered doing so knowing that the caregiver would understand? That's a red flag, right? So even making the family kind of feel bad for canceling, I know it happens, right? Because it's terrible that they do that to us. But even that is kind of like you're playing on their humanity as opposed to your professional relationship. So questions to ask yourself: does this create a dual role or overlapping expectations? Does this present a risk to your objectivity? Does it create a risk of exploitation or taking advantage? Are there reasonable alternatives that can be offered? Can I implement safeguards to protect the client? What a reasonable third party judges as acceptable? And this is not just a clear-cut decision-making tree where it's like, no, okay, can't do it, right? It's a little more complicated than that. I put in a bunch of extra examples in case we had time for them, but we don't. So you can revisit these later should you like to. Some of them are fun and funny. So key takeaways real quick: boundaries protect clients and you. Multiple relationships can lead to ethical violations even when intentions are good. Okay, so it's regardless of intention. It's the impact. The BCBA requires clear, professional, respectful communication, and KidsPeace obviously does as well. Things must be reported, and when in doubt, ask your supervisor, document, and maintain professionalism. The final thing I'm really looking forward to is the stuffing. So that is your third keyword, is stuffing. And Here are the ethical code citations. And then these are the KidsPeace policies that we pulled from for this training. And I appreciate all of you guys hanging out. Sorry I kept you a couple extra minutes. Hopefully that was helpful. All right.
Well, happy holiday to everybody. And Rob, feel better.